Greetings. I'd like to introduce this recording of the Future Transform. Back in April, we hosted Dr. Ashley Finley to talk about a study that she had led about how academic faculty understand and think about academic freedom. So just a little backing and filling. We'd been doing sessions on academic freedom for quite some time. We've had some great scholars who've written, very powerful books on the subject. This time what we did was we dove into it from what college professors and instructors actually think about the subject. The study from the American Association of Colleges and Universities, or AAC&U, is very rich, very powerful, very thoughtful, full of some interesting nuance and surprise. And our conversation really covered this in great detail and explored what does it mean, or what does academic freedom mean right now, and what threatens it, and what we can do to best support it. So with that introduction, I hope you enjoy this recording of the Future Transform. Well, let me just, while everyone's introducing themselves, let me just welcome everybody. Welcome to the Future Transform. I am so glad to see you here today. We have a wonderful person as our guest, and we have a great important topic, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Ashley Finley, on the forum, we have a tradition. We tend to avoid the academic obituary introduction, where someone describes what they've done their whole life, aiming at an obituary or a tombstone. Instead, what we ask is what you're going to be working on for the next year. So I'm curious, what ideas, what topics, and what projects are top of mind for you in the rest of 2025?
Uh, Thank you, Brian. Well, it's a pleasure to be on again. I do believe I had a pass through on the forum before. Is how I know about the cat, and other times talking with you. And I appreciate avoiding the thing that I wrote about myself, which is my bio. So I would say two things are top of mind, and they're going to sound disconnected, but I'll try to draw a line for them. So the first thing is a project that I'm working on with Campus Compact. And that is a project, I'll try to find that press release on it, but it is a project working to build what we believe will be a comprehensive, multifunctional, and not yet seen or existing, as one would hope, platform for organizing and collective organizing around civic engagement in higher education. So that is being funded by IBIS Group. It's in collaboration with a group called More Perfect, which is a national group, K through 12 and higher ed, and the Karsh Center for Democracy at the University of Virginia. And it is a more than blue sky, but it is a big vision project for how this is, as some of us might know, Tom Schnabelt, who was at Stanford University, kind of gave us the challenge about a couple of years ago. He said, what would it look like for the field to organize itself? So we are trying to build a comprehensive, again, multifunctional platform that would enable that. No frameworks to adopt, no principles that we think you should have. We're just going to provide a space to get things done together and to think about what it means to collectively organize around civic action and advancing democracy, or at least democratic principles. The second project is a multi-association. It has 11 higher ed associations working collaboratively to advance. I know everybody's working and playing nicely together these days, which I really love. And I can't tell you how well these 11 associations, and again, you can look at the press release on this, ACRO, the Association of Registrars, is leading it with Walmart Foundation funding, and it is to scale the adoption of learning and employment records. And which seems like two pretty technical projects I'm realizing right now, but the line here, and this actually will wrap into our conversation today, the line here is around an office that I lead at AAC&U called the Office of Research and Public Purpose. And the idea for that office is to take aim at three areas in which higher education has traditionally been viewed to have contributions to the public good. That is around economic thriving, community thriving, and personal thriving. And so if you think about the ways in which we advance career readiness, community engagement, and well-being, or or whole person development, if you will, in that third category. Um, I think we can say that we see those, but when we actually look at how campus work is done and even how national work is done, those are three areas that are highly siloed, and yet they have great interactive effects and really ultimately make sense in combination. So the point of the office is to bring work in those areas together and in dialogue, and so that's how I hope all of this work eventually fits together.
That's a lot of work. I mean, it's two very, very ambitious projects. I that second, I've never heard of 11 higher ed associations. I've never
I
heard of
know, I
six being
know,
combined. That's
exactly,
that's Prometheus.
exactly. It's called the LER for Learning and Employment Record Accelerator Project. And again, you'll find the press release, and if anybody's interested or has any follow up, but it's we hope really opens up space for a lot of different kinds of conversations on campuses.
I bet. And for the first one, I love how that's consistent with a long-running AAC&U emphasis on liberal education, supporting civic engagement and democracy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I look forward to perhaps bringing you back or other people on your team
Would love that.
to talk about either of those once they reach some, major milestone release.
Love that. That'd be fun.
Well, but we've brought you here to talk about one of the great contentious subjects in academics, and that's to do with academic freedom. And friends, if you're new to the forum or if you've missed our previous sessions, we've hosted over the past couple of years several different scholars on the subject, including we had the lead from the American Association of University Presidents. We had two
Mhm.
scholars who published a recent book on academic freedom, and it's of course an incredibly important topic and one that has a great deal of nuance and depth to it, not to mention a lot of complexity. Um, what Ashley has done with your team has been to produce a survey of faculty attitudes towards academic freedom. And I just put a link to the report in the chat.
That's
If
fine.
you haven't seen this, this is unusually rich and dense. There's
Mhm.
nothing you can skip. Every paragraph in that is content and very, very interesting. I was really, really impressed by just the style, but also what it found is so important. Actually, I was just going to say you surveyed people from a variety of states, each of which were undergoing some different degree of legislative maneuvers at the state level
Correct.
around academic freedom. You broke the recipients up into all kinds of different categories and then fused those into three different classes. Um,
Hmm.
I'm going off of memory here. I think it was basically high confidence, high status, medium confidence status, and lower confidence and status. Uh,
Yep, that's
and then
pretty
you asked,
close. Yep.
okay, and then you asked each of them great questions. And uh, there's so many of the findings that move me, and I just want to ask you about one of them just to kick things off.
Great. Great.
Is half of the respondents said that they had self-censored in the past year.
Yeah.
And the self-censorship wasn't of opinions per se. It was of things they knew to be true about the world, and
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
were careful not to say it. And you broke this down in different ways. You talked about in different situations, whether it was working with curricula, in different audiences, if it was faculty, students, or administration. But I was really struck by that finding. That's what did you think of that when all that data came in and when you were cutting that? How did you and your team respond to this?
I love that you started with that, Brian. There's a because in some ways it's the most it's one of the ways in which we've had one of the more striking findings, which is the ways in which faculty are self-censoring or have apprehension around speaking or acting. And ar- around any of around any of the kinds of behaviors or attitudes that we asked about in the survey, you really had about a range of anywhere from a quarter at minimum to up to about a half of where we saw these varying types, varying ways in which faculty were self-censoring and expressed levels of apprehension. And I think so it's almost the totality of the finding across many, many items, many, many questions, if you will, that speaks to an overall picture of what many of you on the screen probably already suspect, but I think it really bears out in the data, is that faculty very clearly have some kind of a running dialogue, a running menu of things they feel they can or cannot say, or maybe shouldn't say, but at the very least, it's a running dialogue. And it reminds me of the program that runs in the back of your phone or on
Yeah.
your computer that drains battery, but you don't see it. Like, it's just, and so to consider the ultimate weight of that running, whether it manifests or not, because I would actually say in the items where you see, do you actually change course curricula, have you actually taken away assignment, et cetera, like the numbers are not as high, but the consideration to do so is certainly there. And the ways in which language in particular, I would say language in particular is highly tempered in these times. It was a striking finding, particularly across thinking about any real estate context. And Brian, just to quickly follow up on your point around the ways in which we disaggregated the data, and you'll see in the report, we don't break every single item out by legislative context or by the other factor that you mentioned. I can give a little bit more context to that. We didn't break out everything by that because the report is already quite dense, and there was a number of things to report on. But we saw, even across any sort of legislative context, that inclination to self-censor and be apprehensive. So regardless, so we broke it out by whether divisive concepts legislation had been passed in a state, whether a bill introducing it had been, whether a bill had been introduced or whether a bill had not been introduced. We worked with Penn America at the time to help us with those just-in-time legislative actions. And so at some point we just made a cut and we made a timestamp, but that's one of the areas in which we disaggregated.
Well, well, first of all, I'm glad I read that rightly, and that I didn't misread the statement. But that struck me as something, a very powerful finding. And you also asked participants to reflect on how their sense of academic freedom had changed over time. And just again, just as a quick note, we're talking about academic freedom rather than freedom of speech. The two have a lot of Venn diagram overlap, but this is the specific nature of it within public and private higher education. How is this in that time horizon? How did people think academic freedom had changed and their behavior had changed?
They definitely saw a sense of some reduction, but there was also feelings in which it hadn't changed all that much. Over 6 to 7 years was the period of time that we asked about. And I often get asked, how did you land on the 6 to 7 years? And we had a national advisory group of scholars in First Amendment rights, constitutional legal scholars. Fred Lawrence, for example, served that role with Phi Beta Kappa, but a number of scholars, and also from civil discourse. That civil discourse was also a component of this study. And we went rounds and rounds on where that timestamp should be. And what was interesting was the whole study was really built off of a reflection on a study that had been done 70 years ago by Paul Lazarsfeld called The Academic Mind. And 70 years ago, what was happening? Well, it was McCarthy era. He did it squarely in the time of McCarthy, which was feeling like unprecedented levels of infringements on academic freedom. And so the genesis of the entire study was really, we feels like we are in these times again, and how might we reflect on both what Lazarsfeld found and such. So we actually started with Lazarsfeld's original instrument, because my colleague at AAUP is a scholar on Lazarsfeld and actually had the yellowed PDF document of his original instrument. So, and it was quite stunning. It was stunning to sit down with this group of scholars 70 years later and see the resonance, even in the ways the questions were shaped. Now, we're not going to ask about Red China 70 years later, but there were some areas in which we had to dramatically change language. But it was really striking how much some of that held up. And so part of what we wanted to do was think about where we were replicating what Lazarsfeld had done. And as we talked through this timestamp, we realized we were going to ask about the same timestamp that Lazarsfeld had used, which was 6 to 7 years. It actually felt like the most appropriate time band to have used. And then when we look back at what Lazarsfeld had done, it felt like it was important to maintain that fidelity. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's why we used that time band. And we were struck by the ways in which faculty had some consistency, but interestingly, the faculty who felt the most infringement, the most in constraint, were the faculty that you earlier described, and this will allow me to come back to this point, you earlier described as having high influence or really high job security. These were the basis that we did a second disaggregation. And so for any of you that are curious about this piece of it, and your faculty, well, you're all probably working on campuses, so you have some sense of this, but the viewpoint that we took into the analysis, and thankfully our research partners at NORC at the University of Chicago helped us work through this analysis, was this premise, was that all faculty are not equal in how they are able to access and exercise power on campus. So as we think about who might be, for example, white, male, four-year research university versus the contrast of female faculty of color at a community college, right? We just, and then even within the state context in that. So we really wanted to take seriously the idea that there are social factors that play into the ways in which faculty might perceive their ability to access and exercise academic freedom. So that's where that second layer is. But interestingly, when we asked about some of those 6 to 7 years questions, it was the faculty that we would presume would have high influence and high job security that felt the most constraint, that had felt the most reduction
That's interesting.
in that constraint. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting.
I just packed a bunch into that little time, but yeah.
Well, you did a great job. There's so much there, but friends, I have more questions for our guests, but the program is for you. This is the time for your questions, your comments, and again, there's a link to the report in the chat. So if you'd like to grab it and work through it and bring up quotes from it, you please feel free to use either the Q&A box or the chat. Long-time forum visitors know that the chat just usually blows up with questions and comments, and I can't even finish saying that sentence before a question has come up. Jarek Janyo, our good friend on the West Coast, asks, has a tenure been designed to protect academic freedom?
I mean, I would agree. Historically, yes, but that doesn't, right? It doesn't mean that faculty necessarily feel that way. And I think so. I think the answer is yes, but this is why I'm a sociologist by training. This is why it felt so important to get a sense of what faculty are actually perceiving, regardless of whether they have tenure. And we were able to break it out by tenure. But I think the important layer that we added for this study was the inclusion of community college, was the inclusion of institutions across a whole sector of institutions. And I can tell you also how we have arrived at the sample, because I think we hung a lot on the methodology behind this study, and I'm quite proud of how much we dedicated to try to make it as methodologically sound as possible. But the other thing we did was we included very intentionally adjunct, contingent lecturers, effectively non-tenure track faculty that we know make up a large majority of faculty positions. All the things that have really changed in 70 years. So sure, we might find ourselves feeling like somewhat similar times, but the context around higher education is just so different.
Yeah, it's astonishing to think about. I mean, the sheer number of institutions, the total number of people who work here, the total number of students. I mean, it's quite a comparison.
For sure, for sure.
I want to say the number
and
of. Oh, go ahead.
Well, and I see that we have another question in here, so I'll come back to Stephen's question. But I just want to mention, because I dropped a little nugget about the sample. So I do think just so you all know, the sample was a purchased list, so it came neither from AAC&U's database nor AAUP's database, and that was our co-collaborator in this. We purchased an instructor of record list from MDR that is really a list making service. And that was part of what our grant funds, funded by Arthur Vining Davis Foundations. Thank you for their generous support of the study. We used grant funds to purchase that. And that is effectively a web scrape of instructors of record. We started with 170,000 people, and then we worked through to what's viable, what's not viable. It is just the way you do survey research today. But I feel like it's important to mention it is not AAC News database, and nor is it AAUP's.
But
Stephen.
it is substantial, and I mean, I'm not a social scientist, but I was really impressed by the apparatus, which you begin the study with. Just starting with 170,000 odd, how many respondents did you end up with getting data from?
8,458, and which put us at about a 5% response rate, which is significantly better than other recent studies on academic freedom. It is not the way I was trained as a quantitative survey researcher, as a sociologist. It is not the way I was trained. It is just another indication of how dramatically our disciplines change, how dramatically our understanding of methodology has to and must change. But it is why you hire a place like NORC at the University of Chicago that has a tremendous reputation as a survey research operation, to do a whole bunch of weighting on the back end to make that smallish sample, much smaller sample anyway. Actually, it's a great sample size. It's just smallish compared to where you came from, but to do all the balancing that makes that statistically representative. So we did extrapolate to the population with this.
And you did raking and all kinds of good stuff.
We sure did. Yeah,
it's a big sample. Well, I said I would stop asking questions, and here I am asking questions. So let me turn to the questions from our community. Professor Stephen Volk at Oberlin College says, we seem to be in growing snitch culture. We both higher ed and K through 12 now have portals where literally anyone can report on faculty or teachers who have said something quote unquote wrong. We now have this in Ohio. How do we respond? And Jarek Janyo chimes in and says, yes, he's just heard that. Similar to what's going on with immigrants, right? IRS sharing information with ICE. I just want if you could just riff on that one, Ashley. I think that's a very, very powerful question to answer.
Yeah, and it's for sure areas that generated our initial thinking about the study of the kinds of questions that we absolutely wanted to include. One of the things I love about these open discussions is I just get to do a whole bunch of contextualizing that I couldn't really do in the study, is trying to just kind of nothing but the facts, ma'am, and trying to kind of present those. But a couple things here. I got asked a question about what's different and actually this was by a student reporter. So I love that the student reporter just had some really terrific, insightful questions. One of the questions that he asked was, how has this changed in 70 years, since the time of McCarthy? One thing I said was the adjunct faculty. There's the nature of the professoriate has changed radically. And I was like, the second thing is social media. The second thing is the ways in which students, faculty in particular, we're talking about academic freedom, can be attacked is far more fluid, far more accessible, far more immediate in the moment. But the other thing that, and this was actually a thought I had in real time, because the student had asked about a faculty member, maybe this will resonate with some people on the screen. Part of the reason that he was reaching out to me and had found the study in the first place was because they had a faculty member on their campus who had one of his ideas taken out of context within the environment of a discussion board. And so that was a striking genesis for why he was asking the questions in the first place. And I mused aloud to him that we know about social media and we know about the posting, we know about the ways in which people can be attacked there, but the other thing that technology has done is it's made the learning environment less private. So there's less of a way in which we are able to provide students a safe space to process, to frankly have the idea that's bad or politically incorrect, or I don't know what, but we don't have as much of an area to create private spaces for learning. And that was something that struck me, that we have more work to think about and more ways to think about where the nuances are in terms um, of how we afford that space for learning. That was one other idea. Very squarely to Stephen, your question, there is a section of the study that asks about if a student says something inappropriate in class, would you turn the student in? Should another student turn the student in? And vice versa, if a faculty member says something, do you feel like students have the right to turn that person in? And as you might imagine, the responses were very much like, no, just handle it there. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Yeah.
Stephen, did you want to chime in on that or build on that?
Thanks. Uh, uh, just very quickly, in Ohio, we passed a law about 2 weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
which requires that all faculty at public institutions post their syllabi online, including all required and recommended readings, including everything that they're going to teach. And that has to be keyword searchable, and it has to be easily gotten from the homepage of the university itself. And so and then there's a requirement that the administration has to follow up on everything that's reported through this portal. And so obviously the challenges of teaching a class, I love your metaphor of the battery at the back of the head, because that's exactly what this is. You're constantly thinking about, what is it that I'm about to say that now will be taken out of context? What have I put on my syllabus? The one word, Black history, so that will certainly send somebody who has nothing to do with the university out against you. And this is adding on to a whole series of sort of private vigilante operations, from whether you're talking about abortion, whether you're talking about healthcare, all sorts of ways in which the private sector, individuals, are being used to police everything that's going on. And this is now invading higher ed. So I don't know what the answer is, but that's the context of my question.
Yeah, thank you. And it's just striking to me how, I mean, you all can do the timeline. I mean, the study came out before the change in the administration. It didn't come out, but it was done. I mean, it was done. We were writing the results and et cetera. But what I can say, and so I don't forget to say it before, if you go to the link where the study is, what you will see now is access to the instrument. So that was always meant to be a grant deliverable. And so it is there. So if there's any part of this study that you want to replicate for your own campus or adjust the questions, wordings, I'm looking at the question about the, which I loved it. I had loved this item when we put it into the study was 1 in 5 faculty members is more hesitant to sponsor or work with a student group that advocates for political or social agenda. Did we define those? We did not define those. Left that up to the individual respondent. But what I do love is that you have the opportunity, if you rerun the study on your own campus, to clarify those, or to even I don't know, adjust those however you like. But we did not clarify them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Friends, if you're new to the forum, this gives you a sense of how this works, where folks will have questions, and the questions will work back and forth across the chat box and out loud. And also, if you're new to the forum, you should know, this is yet one of several cats who will climb on me and try and show off for the camera as well, which is we have our good friend Roxanne Riskin up in Connecticut. She added to this discussion by saying that she sees mental health, student or faculty, saying they want to kill someone like the president or themselves. That might warrant attention, counseling referral, perhaps not snitching exactly. So I guess that's another level of this kind of discussion.
Yeah, and I see. Okay. Yes, actually, Roxanne, one of the recommendations at the end of the report, perhaps the simple one, and it's the one that we finished with, is pay attention to faculty mental health. We talk a lot about, and it is meant to point toward the battery drain. that as we know that we're in a crisis of student mental health, we have been for a long time. I met Brian early on in my time with AAC&U, and really since even back in those days, we're talking like 2009, even before that, I was working on student mental health. So I've been doing that for a very long time. We've not paid nearly enough attention to what it means to actually build cultures of care on campus in ways that take seriously that kind of drain, providing faculty space to talk with each other. Yeah, I see the resonance. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just true. I mean, it's where, and in fact, even starting my work with student mental health and well-being, again, a couple decades ago, people were like, shouldn't we be talking about faculty mental health too? And I was like, yes, of course. But, and it just feels like we have even more impetus to be taking seriously what it means to be teaching, conducting scholarship, trying to be a mentor in these times. I'm thinking absolutely about our LGBTQ faculty, our faculty of color, our first gen faculty, might be coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, what it means to support them, to have honest and open dialogue conversations with students so that they can support those students, but also have a chance to talk about what it means to do their job. And yeah, there's lots of reasons to do it. I'd love for people to take it seriously. Yeah.
Here, here. We've had over the past 4 years, we've had several sessions on mental health, including as well faculty and staff mental challenges. And so if you'd like, those are in our archives as well. Roxanne had a follow-up clarification question, and maybe this is a methodology question, actually. She's curious about what types of political and social agendas, what does that actually mean? She brings out a passage, quote, 1 in 5 faculty members is more hesitant to sponsor or work with a student group that advocates for a political or social agenda, unquote. So what does that mean then?
Yeah, we didn't unpack that. We didn't say by political we mean this, by social we mean this. We actually, I guess in some ways tried to we did define academic freedom. That we did, and in part because AAUP has a very clear definition. AAC&U and AAUP collaborate on the principles around academic freedom, but AAUP continues to have a very good and strong operationalizing way in which they have operationalized that term. So we absolutely use that. We did define in a short way per examples what divisive concepts legislation means. We had that, but to the political social, we sort of, in part, right, and I hope people on the screen can appreciate this, not to sway one way or another, to suggest that we had a particular agenda as we took on the survey one way or another. That felt important. It felt important to, and we tried to recruit a national advisory board that really spanned sides of the political spectrum, and get advice and through that. So lots more I could say. If that item appears, if anybody goes looking for it, that item appears in kind of a list of areas on campus in which faculty might be apprehensive to engage, or where they feel like they've been reluctant to engage or to self-censor. But we tried to think about almost not quite nested, but different areas of the faculty environment. So we didn't want to think about academic freedom just in the classroom, for example. Obviously, that's a hugely important one, but we wanted to get some context for what it also meant for faculty to be engaging around campus, right? That's a huge part of faculty life, is the way in which they're engaging in committee meetings, faculty senate, and there's an item that just asked about informal conversations with all manner of stakeholders. So we wanted that. And then we also ask about just your discipline. How does this also relate in your discipline? I would say probably more than anything, faculty felt greater or less self-censorship and apprehensive as it pertained to their disciplinary society and within their professional arena. Not that they didn't feel some, they've definitely still felt some, but it wasn't nearly as much as on campus and in the classroom.
Good. I really appreciate you unpacking that, Ashley. And Roxanne, as always, thank you for the really, really good question. Friends, you have time for more questions, so please feel free to bring them in, again, through the chat or through the Q&A box, or if you'd like just to join us with your microphone and camera. Our good friend on the island nation of Malta, Philip Lingard, asks this: to what extent do forum members feel they have started self-censoring since the Trump anti-DEI initiative started? So I guess that's for you, Ashley, but also for everybody here. So if anyone wants to answer that in the chat, please feel free to. And of course, if you don't feel you can answer it, well, no, you should feel completely free here. But that's a really good question. I'm while everyone else actually is starting to think about that, I'm curious, Ashley, what you've seen. I know your research was finished before Trump's second inauguration, but do you have a sense of how things may have changed?
Well, I mean, certainly the direct attacks on campuses, right? The reduction of funding, right? The taking away of the grant money, or just the fear of that, renewed fears about immigration and protection of students on campuses. Everything has just become much more acute. So the ways in which the divisive concepts legislation has had for several years leading up to when we even did the study, but now it's much more targeted, it's much more specific. And I would say, without acting like I know what's happening on all kinds of campuses, but I have, even in my own world, heard all versions of this. I heard from a campus just the other day that I'm working with on a grant project, and I had suggested that they do a disaggregated analysis to simply understand what student demographics were falling into a particular high impact experience. They had passed that request on to institutional research, and institutional research hesitated and said they needed to run it up the chain. And that was just to conduct a disaggregated analysis. So that's probably not in a state that any of us would off the top of our head mention. So the running, so the battery drain is, I think, even probably going even faster, for sure. What I have appreciated about these conversations and the ability to talk about the study, I'm so grateful that it's out. It was such a labor of love.
Yeah.
And I'm so probably like no other study I've done, just super excited to kind of get feedback on it, kind of hear what people are thinking and how they're reacting. I mean, more than anything, what I've heard is thank you for the evidence. Thank you for just providing an evidence base that we can look at, that we can engage in, that's not just around assumptions or opinions or feelings, which may be valid, but not, but at least we want to provide spaces where you have some balance with evidence. And so I have been heartened by that.
It's one of the solid things about this. This is really, really solid social science.
Thank you.
Philip,
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I think you've gotten some answers in the chat. While those answers are coming, we have another question from Jarek Jania. And he says that, well, it's a question about safeguards. What are the safeguards that we now have for academic freedom? And if I could build onto that a little bit, are you seeing any new safeguards appear or any changes in those safeguards?
I can't speak to that directly. In part, and this is my own disclaimer coming into these conversations, I am not a scholar on academic freedom. I will fully admit that. I'm a sociologist. I've studied in many other areas. It's not particularly this one. I've learned a lot in conducting this. I learned a lot from working with our National Advisory Board. So I have some of that background, but part of my response is I think people really are anew trying to figure out what those safeguards are. I would say, now one of the things that was helpful, and Brian, you started with this, was sort of where are the boundaries between academic freedom and freedom of speech or freedom of expression?
Yep. Yep.
And those were ones that we had to grapple with. And I won't say that you won't find any references, but I tried very hard in the study itself to be clear that we were talking about academic freedom. And that is because I'm swayed by arguments that it is different than freedom of speech. And Fred Lawrence, who was on our advisory board for this, who's again constitutional law scholar, was very helpful in thinking through this. However, there is a part of the study that asks about 4 areas of faculty's experiencing of academic freedom or feeling the limitations of academic freedom. And those 4 areas, so just name them quickly because I have the slide right in front of me: teaching content without any interference, investigating and publishing research findings without any interference, speaking freely when participating in institutional governance. And the 4th one is speaking freely as a citizen. And that butts up directly to freedom of speech. And so that you might imagine there was some navigating within our advisory board around that. Those 4 areas that I just mentioned are the ways that AAUP operationalizes academic freedom. So it is embedded. So that citizen perspective, not a protected academic status, that citizen status is already embedded in the way the AAUP defines it. So we're faithful to AAUP's definition, and we just had a mutual agreement to disagree on that. But I raise it because I want to be transparent in how difficult these conversations can be, and the issues that they engender, where the boundaries are. And I think there's some good stuff that has been written on this, but if any of you are tangling with those complexities on campus, it's just to validate that even within our little national advisory group trying to put together a national study, we had those same conversations, probably without the kinds of baggage that you might be having on campus around those issues. So it's just, I thought that's a point that I always want to lift up as a complexity of this topic that I have been helped to understand a little bit better.
It is a very complex topic, and I really appreciate your wrangling with it and being straightforward about this too. We've had a whole string of comments that have come in the chat. Sarah Kelly said that no matter who is president, it's always good to treat other humans the way you would like to be treated. So we have the golden rule in the chat. Thank you, Sarah. Our good friend Mark Rush says, what is intriguing is the nature of the restrictions on free speech. Prior to Trump, there were complaints about forced speech. Mark, is that compelled speech? In your syllabi, having to sign statements as part of the interview process, etc. Now, particular speech is being suppressed. DEI statements, inconsistently defined anti-Semitism, etc. I want to actually, if you want to take a run at that comment at all.
Sorry, I'm looking across different ones here and I'm trying to.
I understand. This is so before Trump, we had complaints about compelled speech, forced speech, and now particular speech is being suppressed, which is a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the nature of the environments. This is just so context specific in many ways. There's a national conversation happening. Okay, here's where I'm going with this. Here's another level set for us all. Another good colleague, right, goes out to I think I could say it's school. I won't say it's school, but school in California, because this college happens to serve on their board. And he came back, and I was chatting with him, and it was at a board meeting, and he was like, no one's talking about this. He said it was a fascinating readjustment in just how in the soup any one of us is with regard to any one of these topics. And it's like, I just interacted with a board for 2 days who, like, really, is this a problem for you? Like, no, but none of us think it's a problem. So I don't know if we are overestimating the ways in which boards are considering these topics. State legislation. I mean, there's so many. So when we talk about the complexity, there's so many layers to that complexity at the same time. And I suppose just inviting ourselves to remember that there are people, right, and whole factions of even higher ed stakeholders don't who either aren't considering the weight and how much this is weighing on faculty, or are just not thinking it's having any much input, much effect at all. Like sort of like this is bluster over here that's not really translating. So that's why it makes it hard to answer some of these things globally, or why I feel reluctant to answer them in a kind of global fashion.
We appreciate that very much.
Mm-hmm.
Mark and Ashley both.
But I would love for other people to weigh in and kind of see what they're hearing. But and I'll mention this quickly. There's a whole front part of the study that does ask about how faculty are engaging in the media around, for example, divisive concepts legislation. So how aware are they of divisive concepts legislation that's been passed in their state? So we actually did, which I sort of ghoulishly liked, but I don't know, it's been like, has legislation been passed? And then we fact check them. So we have the percentages of faculty who were basically right about whether legislation had been passed. And the people, here's what you want to know: the faculty who live in states where concepts legislation has been passed were like 96% accurate. Like they really know, and they do tend to be much more aware of the issues than faculty, or it's taking up more space in conversations, et cetera. But we do have a kind of section of that study where we tried to test our own assumptions about how much are faculty thinking about this or dealing with it every day.
That's the state level differences are really important. I'm
Totally.
really glad you brought those out.
Yeah.
A few minutes ago, Phil Lingard asked about how people responded, and Brent Presley in the chat says, the normal DEI work that I'm participating in is no longer being promoted in social media as a result of the spotlight being placed on the University of Wisconsin and technical college systems at this moment.
Yeah.
So again, back to state politics and state action.
Yeah. I saw that one too, Brian. And whenever Wisconsin comes up, I want to give a shout out to this study that is pretty terrific. And we looked at it, and the other thing, April Reshik and other colleagues there who conducted this were generous enough to put the instrument in. This is among students. This is ways in which students feel constraint, apprehension, self-censorship, a lack of freedom of expression for themselves. And I think this study is very well done. The instrument is extremely thoughtful. And one of the things that I appreciated as part of their findings was the ways in which students feel constraint and feel apprehension because of other students. Faculty often get a bad rap for creating environments that are politically biased, et cetera. But this study makes a compelling point that students are equally able to censor and censure each other.
That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that study.
Yeah, it's a great study. They did a really terrific job.
In the link. Again, Brent, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Good luck in doing that work. We have another question that comes up from Jihong Chen, who asks, I'm curious about what offices or constituencies in other universities and colleges are spearheading programs around these issues. Is this an issue for the provost, DEI office, faculty development, or someone else?
Yeah. Part of what I feel like is my party trick here is that any question you ask, I will try to attach to a statistic in the study. Hey. So one of the ways this makes me think is one of the more fun findings that we had, and one that we could draw a direct parallel to what Paul Lazarsfeld had found 70 years ago. So there's a question on the study that asks, what single stakeholder group do you think is most responsible for maintaining academic freedom at your institution? We'll give them a whole list of options, right? Everything from the president to the students, alumni in between.
Don't reveal it yet. I'm just
okay. Oh yeah.
Sorry, let's ask everyone in the chat which position or which person or which department on campus do you think is the one that is the most focused on academic freedom? Just put it in the chat. This is just a quick poll. Krista Heiser. Hi, Krista, says faculty. And I think that's come on, the rest of you. Which other unit on campus would be most likely to do this? Joanna Holbert says the chief academic officer. I'm waiting for someone to say Ashley, but no one said that yet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Bill
that's
Presley
definitely.
asks faculty. And the president of the institution, Jarek says, how about all of us? Mark Rush says
Right. Right.
faculty, but they don't necessarily agree on the scope and definition. True, true. And Catherine James's point is interesting. The president of the institution, although it appears the faculty firmly supports her, James Boswell is faculty. Yeah. All right. Now, Ashley, you get to tell us, reveal the answer. What was the overwhelming choice for the person or department most responsible for academic freedom?
The one slide I'll show. Can I show a slide quickly?
Oh, sure, sure. If you can grab.
This is your big reveal.
There you go. The chief
70.
academic officer.
Yep, and you can see my note below this. So 70 years ago, 44% said it was the president. And here, 70 years later, 16%.
Wow.
So yeah. And this was and I should note that faculty and faculty union were actually split apart. And just for the sort of nature of PowerPoint, I stuck them together, which that was such a great decision. But anyway, it gives you a flavor in a sense. But the dramatic difference between what happened, who it was 70 years ago, who really was seen as the holder of that kind of power anyway on a campus. But I had presented that slide for particularly provosts with ASCU, the Association of State Colleges and Universities, just terrific support over there. And that's always a fun room to present that particular statistic to. And what does it mean and how does it translate? But even to the earlier point around faculty mental health, right? Like thinking about where we think the holders of academic freedom are, but also where the generators of the innovation and the spaces where we can really dig into this issue, where we can pay attention and take seriously faculty mental health. There's, I hope, also something about when we talk about chief academic officers to also say, well, here's an opportunity to be in the proactive and not reactive side of this issue.
That's one of a bunch of really important findings that I hope everyone gets to take away from this. The importance of that dean, that provost, that chief academic officer is really, really interesting. Philip Lingard followed up by saying, I'm finding the responses relatively encouraging. From the reporting in America we were getting in Europe, I was anticipating I would now have to be as careful in the States as I was when interviewed by CGTN in Beijing. Yeah, we're not quite at that level yet. But I'm glad to hear it, Philip.
Yeah.
Also in the chat, Elaine Lazda shares a story with a link about Elaine, is this University of Albany? Professor who
yes, David Carpenter.
Yeah, I remember this story.
He was put on administrative leave after Monsanto challenged some of his sort of a side hustle of being an expert witness in court cases, and he was an expert on PCBs. Is still, he's not dead or anything, but he was put on administrative leave, and then there was faculty governance inquiry as to the reasons for that administrative leave. There's a whole, if you Google it, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. He was eventually restored. He's a public health physician. But yes, it was all very hush hush, and he was like quietly asked to go away.
Wow.
For testifying against Monsanto, essentially. I'm boiling it down, but you get the idea.
Wow. What do you take away from that story, Elaine?
Well, that was kind of my point. It wasn't part of the, what would we call the sense of today's times being restrictive. This was before this. This was in a different political climate. And it was not the federal government that seemed to be doing the, attack on his speech. It seemed to be, and I don't know enough of the facts about this, but it did seem that Monsanto could have been leaning on our campus administration as opposed to like
Yeah.
government people specifically. It wasn't a public policy question, I don't think. That's what I'm trying to say.
I see what you mean. But it's
Yeah.
but Monsanto is a huge company, very influential, very big player. Ashley, is this a story you want to reflect on?
Well, you know, I'll draw a line to a statistic here.
There we go.
So Elaine, thanks for flagging this, because as I mentioned, we did ask about ways in which this topic affects scholarship. And I was appreciated Corey Clark, who was part of our advisory team, who specifically invited us to ask this item here, which felt concerned as a scholar to express what you would believe to be correct statements about the world. And then the one above it, extensive refrain from expressing opinions that you would draw negative attention to your research. And you can see in both of those instances, you're at or a little over half of faculty responding that they've at least occasionally felt that way. And that's sobering, particularly in an area where we didn't tend to see as much constraint as in others, but those were two pieces that were worth taking a moment with.
No, thank you. Your party game is well played and continues to be well played. That's solid data, and very concerning. I mean, I love the way you broke that out into details like concerned about using institutional hardware to communicate on, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
But actually, I'm afraid to say that our time is up. Our hour has flown by.
That's it.
And people have so many more thoughts and questions in the chat.
Well, you do. Here's my email. So
there we go.
I would love to hear from you and would be happy to chat anytime.
What's the best way to keep up with your work with AAC&U? Should we just look at the AAC&U website for news?
For sure. Let me drop in. We have I think I still got it up here. And I know we're over time, so I'll do this quickly, but we have a research page and we have an Office of Research and Public Purpose, but tons of great resources here that are try to keep it going, keep the space highly dynamic. But that's one good way for sure.
Excellent.
And also just email me. I'm happy to respond.
Well, that's very, very kind of you. And you've done heroic work with this. Please give our best to your great team who produced all of this work.
Thank you, Brian.
And for you for so elegantly and with such detail explaining it and taking it further. This is important research and everyone should know it.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you, Brian, always.
Oh, our pleasure. But friends, don't go away yet. We just have to wrap things up. Thank you all very much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. And as always, the forum community produces fantastic comments and questions. I'm really grateful to all of you. If you'd like to keep up with our sessions to come, just head to the forum website, forum.futureofeducation.us. And you can also go into our past and take a look at the topics that we've covered before. In the meantime, this is a bit of an unusually stressful and chaotic season for American higher education. Here at the forum, we hope that everybody is safe and sound. We hope that you're all well. And please take care, everybody, and we'll see you next time online. Bye-bye.
Thank you.